Hello, good morning. Welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in, you guessed it, less than 20 minutes.
Hello, it's Thursday, November the 14th. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. It's the last day of the parliamentary week. It's the last day of our week. Thursday is the new Friday, but it's a biggie. Rachel Reeves heads to the Mansion House this evening for the latest of her big autumn set pieces, a speech trying to get back on the front foot after a bumpy couple of weeks with the budget.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the government's assisted dying bill, which is very much in the papers and only a couple of weeks now to go until the big vote. And we're going to talk about Donald Trump, of course, because every day you have to talk about Donald Trump these days, don't you? He secured a majority in the House of Representatives last night, and he's made two more picks for his cabinet that are going to make UK officials cry into their cornflakes this morning. But Sam, let's kick off with Rachel Reeves. The Mansion House speech is a big annual number, isn't it, for any Chancellor? It's the first time Rachel Reeves has done this. Essentially, you go off into the City of London on a Thursday evening. They put on a big banquet, I think, and you make your big main speech to the city, to the financial firms that sort of drive that whole part of the economy. And Rachel Reeves has got a lot of policy to talk about, Sam. She wants to talk about growth. She wants to change the conversation back onto growth again. Do you want to talk us through very briefly the key tenets of what she's going to be talking about?
So there's a big announcement today, and that's to do with pensions. But it was stressed to me yesterday that this speech isn't really a techie speech about merging pension funds, which is
hooray! That's brilliant.
Just as
Goodness,
well, which is
on
just
a Thursday morning.
I know, and we'll get into the pros and cons of what they're doing in a moment. But this is a speech trying to wrestle back the agenda and re-emphasise how this government's top priority is growth. And so it's a big picture argument about all the things the government are going to be doing in order to push growth in the years to come, which, frankly, Jack, she needs to do because the government has taken something of a battering since that budget, which was, can you believe it, only 2 weeks ago? It was 2 weeks ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. And it remains under fire with business groups having another pop. My colleague Mark Kleiman got hold of a letter yesterday from the British Retail Consortium about worries about the impact of the national insurance rise. The Times has been reporting this morning that some people who signed the pro-Labour letter ahead of the general election are now really upset at the way that the national insurance hike has sort of circled around and hit them. So Rachel Reeves is also facing a backlash over the way that the national insurance hike is hitting parts of if not quite the public sector, then bits of civil society and the private sector that support public services. So she's under fire from quite a lot of fronts. So it's unsurprising that she's going to use this big moment in order to try and sort of right the ship.
Yeah, Sam, this narrative that the government is trying to push on growth, I think we're going to hear this every day, every week. The lesson that Labour officials say they've learned from watching what's just happened to Joe Biden and latterly to Kamala Harris is that they feel that not enough was done through the early part, the mid part of that presidency to hammer home a very core message of what Joe Biden was trying to achieve as president every single day. They said even though in many ways Joe Biden's presidency was an economic success for America, there are certainly millions and millions of Americans who didn't feel that, didn't get that message at all, and of course voted for Donald Trump in their droves. And the message Labour have taken from that is that we need to hammer away at this every day. They want the message to go out to everyone in the country every day that our priority is your economy, our priority is your economy. As you say, though, the problem that they've got, certainly for the last couple of weeks, is that a lot of that messaging is being drowned out by backlash to the budget. There's other stories kicking around today on this. There's a survey of The CBI has done, the big business lobby group, saying 61% of businesses have got a negative view of the budget. There's another story around about one of the pub chains saying the budget will put 10p on a pint, which rather gives the lie to Rachel Reeves' claim to be cutting the price of a pint, and so on and so on. And the Tories, of course, know that they've got an open goal here, a wound that they can keep kicking away at, and they will continue to do it. So the question is, can the government move the argument on now? Can they say, look, we had to do that thing. The economy, the national finances were in a mess. We needed to do that thing. Now let's move on and all talk about how we can get the economy growing again. That's a difficult thing to do, but that's definitely what Rachel Reeves is trying to achieve tonight.
So the policy at the heart of the Mansion House speech is the sort of comes at the conclusion of a big review into the way Britain's pension funds manage their money and invest the money on behalf of future pensioners. And the consequence of that is that she will announce plans to create 8 mega funds. So what happens, particularly with local authority pensions, is that they're split in something like 86 different schemes all across the country, and the government wants to pass laws that will essentially force them to merge into a number of much bigger funds. The idea being that if pension funds exist at scale, they're much more likely to invest, and the hope is that they invest in British projects like the infamous Canadian Teachers Pensions Fund, which owns all sorts of bits of our railways and other bits of public infrastructure. Some of the European pension funds also buying up bits of the UK. The question has been, why can't we do that ourselves? The challenge, though, Jack, is that Rachel Reeves is not the first Chancellor to ask exactly this question. It was one that George Osborne posed in 2015, and there have been incremental moves for the last 9 years to do it, but surprise, surprise, doing it is very, very tricky. And I was talking to some pensions experts yesterday, and they were saying, look, the goal of this government actually seems sensible, and this will potentially unlock some of the money that Rachel Reeves hopes it can. But the challenge is that you have dozens and dozens of small organisations charged with the legal duty to look after the money under their care, who in quite large numbers will be resistant, are likely and are incentivised to be resistant to what the government wants. And you can't just and it will be a challenge if they think just passing a law will sort this out. There is likely to be a fight, and the whole of the pensions advisory industry, a massive, massive industry, will fight the government every step of the way, because there are so many fees to be made off the back of advising 87 different schemes rather than 8 mega schemes, that some of the biggest funds and biggest advisory firms in the world will spend the next few years lobbying the government for this not to happen. And so, it's an easy headline, but a very, very tough thing to actually achieve.
Indeed. Rachel Reeves telling the FT she's confident this can unlock £80 billion worth of investment. Let's see if that actually happens. There are, of course, other things coming down the track, Sam, that the government is planning to do or move on, that it says will also start to unlock growth, in the horrible jargon that they like to use. We've got this white paper coming very soon now on economic inactivity, i.e. what the government's going to do to try and get lots of people off welfare and back into work. There's a report in the Times today saying sickness benefits related to obesity alone are costing £10 billion a year. But again, this is a very thorny policy issue which successive Conservative governments tried to tackle with varying degrees of success. Since COVID, it's got much, much worse. But the government says this is absolutely essential, A, to get the welfare bill down, but also to get the economy growing as well. There's other stuff coming as a small business strategy command paper, which sounds boring, but small business is viewed by many people as a key engine of the economy. There's a trade command paper coming, and obviously that's very relevant given what's happening over in America right now. All these different levers the government wants to pull to try and get those growth figures up by the time of the next election, try and get some extra revenues coming into the coffers they can invest in public services and show the public that, yes, voting Labour was actually a good idea. It was all worth it in the end. They've got a few years to make that argument, but it still looks like an uphill struggle at the moment.
So the challenge for growth remains 2 weeks on from the budget. In the private sector, the rise to employers' national insurance, the head of the CBI saying it does make that national insurance rise makes it harder to make decisions to invest in the UK. But the political backlash, just to move us on slightly, is to the rise in employers' national insurance that will hit if not quite the public sector, then those organisations from GP surgeries to hospices to social care, to frankly all those other bits of civil society that are also hit by the national insurance hike, but are not in the public sector, which is of course been given money to basically exempt it to stop the public sector suffering as a result of the rise. In Prime Minister's questions yesterday, Keir Starmer came under a sort of double assault, both from the new Tory leader Kemi Badenoch and from the prominent Lib Dem MP Christine Jardine, about what is he going to do about different bits of things like GP surgeries who are facing additional pressures from this. And I've got a bit of sort of intel on where we are in government. Essentially, individual secretaries of state are now free in their negotiations to give things like GP surgeries a bit more cash to help ease the pain from the national insurance rise. So Wes Streeting referred to this yesterday. Keir Starmer was talking about it on the plane to Baku in Azerbaijan on Monday. The government's language is that they are not they're not immune to the criticism, and there could well be cash between now and Christmas for individual secretaries of state can dole out in order to sort of dull the pain, in order to sort of help with the new burden. So Rachel Reeves' language is, I'm not immune to the criticism, but it's a bit more complicated than that. The Treasury has said there will be no more money from us to individual Whitehall departments to help with this. The spending envelopes that were announced at the budget stand firm. We are not going to dole out any more cash in order to help bits of the, bits of your stakeholders, hospices, GPs, all the rest of it. We're not going to give you any more cash to deal with that. If you want to help them, you're more than welcome to, members of the cabinet, but you've got to find the money from within your existing budgets. But what that means is that Rachel Reeves negotiated spending settlement. She negotiated the budget with all her colleagues around the table ahead of the budget and fixed those budgets, knowing that she was going to raise national insurance, but not telling them she was going to raise national insurance. And now secretaries of state are having to find money from within their budgets that they didn't know when they negotiated that sum that they were going to need to find. So I anticipate there's quite a lot of grumpiness inside Whitehall that, in a sense, they signed up to a budget and then were foisted on a big additional new burden at the last moment after they'd signed off their settlement. So help can come, but and help will come in some areas. And, I think the Department of Health have signalled most strongly that a bit of additional relief is on its way, but we don't know how much. But they're not getting any more money from the Treasury, even though the budgets were negotiated without the secretaries of state knowing that they're going to have to potentially give up a portion of those budgets to temper those national insurance rises.
You talk about the Department of Health. Interesting to hear Wes Streeting yesterday, Sam, talking about the cost to the NHS. Of course, its budget's massively under pressure, as always, even with the extra money that went in at the budget 2 weeks ago. The cost to the NHS of assisted dying laws that are being proposed by backbench Labour MP, and which we're going to have this totemic vote on at the very end of this month. Wes Streeting has come out as really the most prominent force against this bill. Amazing to see the Health Secretary sort of almost campaigning, waging his own personal campaign against this backbench bill, which the government is taking no official position on. Spoke pretty strongly about it, said he's going to ask officials to draw up a cost analysis to the NHS if there was what he calls, or what people are calling, an assisted dying service, and talked about the chilling argument that individuals might be persuaded to cut their lives short to save the NHS money. Now, it felt when this bill was first being put forward, Sam, that it was almost certainly going to go through. There was a sort of vague assumption that lots and lots of the new Labour MPs were just instinctively going to support this. It feels less certain to me now what's going to happen with this. It really does. I mean, nobody really knows. Nobody's doing any whipping. Nobody's polled all the MPs. Lots and lots of MPs haven't made up their minds. But hearing the Health Secretary come out against this repeatedly and vocally is definitely swinging over at least some undecided MPs. And it now feels to me really in the balance how this is going to go when the vote comes at the end of the month. What do you think?
I'm getting Labour MPs, new Labour MPs spontaneously contacting me to say exactly that they might have been minded to do it, but they're just worried about how it's being done. And it's the how it's being done that's the problem, right? Because it's being done through what's known as a private member's bill. This individual kind of MP, Kim Leadbeater, has put together the legislation. But there are so many knock-on impacts to government that it's quite hard for somebody who's not in government to control the overall process, particularly given that budgets are at stake. Wes Streeting said something really interesting yesterday. You talked about him talking about the cost pressure, but the interesting bit, just as interesting, is why there's a cost pressure. In Wes Streeting's language, he talked about the need to spend money on a new service. They've got to set up a new service in order to deliver this policy. I mean, I can't really get my head around that, particularly at this time in the morning. But essentially, presumably, there needs to be an organisation that will deliver the ability for people to end their lives if they are terminally ill and they only have less than 6 months to live, and they've been certified by 2 GPs and it's been approved by a High Court judge. But he's basically saying the creation of that will simply mean pound for pound, other bits of my budget are going to have to be reduced. And he commissioned this analysis of how he's asked his departmental officials to work out an analysis of how much it's going to cost. And in a sign of the internal nervousness about the health secretary's position, the Press Association did a story yesterday on Wes Streeting saying that, and they were made to reissue it because the initial headline said Wes Streeting commissions review into costs of assisted dying, and they were told that the word review was too strong, and they were asked to downgrade it to analysis. So inside Whitehall, even the use of two basically interchangeable terms was causing a great deal of neurosis, because there was a feeling, I think even amongst other ministers in the health department, that Wes Streeting was going too far, basically using his departmental machinery to signal his opposition and to explain the arguments against this. And I think what's happening is that Labour MPs are watching Wes Streeting and all the warnings that he's given, and that is having a very big impact. There isn't whipping around this, but I think the centre of the government is watching Labour MPs' opinion very, very closely, and they think it's in the balance now. And with Keir Starmer clearly loosening the rules around what cabinet ministers can say and not arguing for it himself, I just wonder whether he worries that too much time will be taken up by this as it goes through Parliament next year, distracting his government's agenda, and actually whether or not this isn't, not the best thing, not the best priority for his government to end up owning overall.
The thing that's really going to distract this government's agenda next year, of course, is the United States of America and its incoming president, Donald Trump. The news coming out from there last night and overnight is about the most jaw-dropping we've had so far, I think, since Trump became president. Confirmation, firstly, that the Republican Party now will hold all three branches of government. They won the House of Representatives formally last night. That means Donald Trump is going to be relatively unfettered, at least in his first 2 years as president, although the majority there is likely to be quite narrow. And we did see in his first term how the main thing that was holding him back was his own senators and some of his own politicians. Some of the stuff, more radical stuff he wanted to do, he was unable to do. Whether that happens this time remains to be seen. But potentially more significant than that, certainly the thing that will have officials and ministers here in the UK government today looking on sort of open-mouthed are his latest cabinet picks, Sam. The initial moves that he made in terms of picking his senior people were, by Trump standards, at the mainstream end of how he operates. His chief of staff is a long-term Republican operator. Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, as Secretary of State, wasn't exactly at the radical end of the Trump spectrum. The picks we got last night are in a very different field to that, and they've left even Republicans in America absolutely astonished. The Attorney General pick, Matt Gaetz, is absolutely one of the most aggressive, loudmouthed, far-right Trumpian figures in the whole of the Republican Party, and it has left people over there very, very worried about what it means for the Justice Department and the rule of law. The one that will have people more concerned over here is his pick of Tulsi Gabbard as his Director of National Intelligence. She is notorious in some of the things that she has said in the past about President Putin. Very soon after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, she put a video out on Twitter calling on Moscow, Washington and Kyiv to put the geopolitics aside. And she later said the war could have been avoided if the West had just guaranteed Ukraine would never become part of NATO. She's very much on that side of the argument. She's now going to be overseeing the intelligence services for the United States. She famously took a trip to Syria in 2017 and declared that the dictator there, Assad, is, quote, not the enemy of the United States. She is someone who is not exactly within mainstream thinking, even within the Trumpian Republican Party on some of this stuff. And again, the reaction in America has been literally open-mouthed, Republicans banging their heads against the wall. It'd be very interesting to see how the UK deals with these sorts of people if they get confirmed by the Senate early in the new year.
With that kind of uncertainty to the West, with general elections in Germany and probably before long in France to the east, I think it's going to be quite a bumpy time, which is why you need a morning podcast to give you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes, Monday to Thursday. We will see you back on Monday. Have a brilliant weekend, and we'll see you then.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.